All right, how's everyone doing?
Oh, I see.
That's great. Can you hear us? Is the mic on, or can you hear us okay? Yep, awesome. So we have this live stream as well, and I'm excited about this session because the roles change. Usually I'm the one being interviewed, and I'm being asked the tough questions. But today we've got three very esteemed reporters that I have a lot of respect for, that we talk quite a bit when they're writing pieces, and I figured it'd be good for us to change roles so that we can hear from them on what they're hearing from the market at large, because they hear from different places. And the couple areas that we wanted to talk about were future of work, as well as artificial intelligence and what's happening in those areas. So, we've got Richard, we've got Rebecca, we've got John. And so what are you seeing right now as it pertains to hybrid work with the companies you're talking to and the people you're talking to? How is it working? Is it working well? Is it not working well? What are you seeing, Richard?
Well, we're seeing it's a great new opportunity for people with non-traditional homemaking roles, right? So if you are a single mother, the technology that, for example, Cisco has allows you to truly operate an office from your home. Well, that's liberating for her economically in one sense, because she no longer has to pay a sitter and so on for her children and commute to a central office. But it also allows the organization to see her more and her potential more and grow in her career. So getting people back to the office is going to be a lot tougher, and we might have to accept a world of which hybrid work is the future.
How many over here, with a show of hands, go to the office more than twice a week? Oh, okay. How many go more than 3 times a week? All right. How many 4 times a week? How many don't go at all to the office?
Yeah.
Interesting. Rebecca, what are you seeing?
I agree. I agree completely with Richard. I am seeing many more economic opportunities for not just women, but also people who are located in different parts of the country and different parts of the world. So it used to be you had to live where you worked. That was just the economic reality for having a job, having a career. That's no longer true for a lot of smart companies that are not forcing mandates. Because as you've said, and you've said on the main stage, and we're seeing it in lots of publications, employees don't want that. They don't want to be told what to do, particularly after we had this pandemic experiment with remote work, where they proved they can get their job done, they can collaborate. There's a lot of different studies about what productivity looks like, what collaboration looks like, but I think employees are really bristling at being told that they have to go back to the office.
Yeah. How about you, John?
Well, there's a gentleman who raised his hand. I think you've been to the office at least 4 you, right? I've been to my office 4 times, like in the last 4 years, probably, because of COVID. And other reasons is that I'm more productive. So I commute from the Bay Area to San Francisco. So it takes me at least like an hour and 15 minutes each way. So consequently, I found myself, driving and getting text messages or Slack or email, like, where are you? We need to do this story now. But if I stayed home, they would say to me, why aren't you in the office? So more productive. One thing I do want to mention is that there are so many companies after the November 30th aha moments, especially in tech. So I cover tech. So many companies that are trying to present themselves as having an AI solution, and a lot of them don't. So what I keep hearing within those companies, the idea is like, holy shit, how do we get to the point of creating revenue for something that we're promising and we've been talking about and announcing partnerships? So there's a definite amount of friction and pressure on them to accelerate things. And I think that has kind of led to this paranoia about AI, like we're doing things too fast, too soon. And I think the American public, there's a poll that came out, like 8 out of 10 Americans want AI development to slow down versus 8 who were in favor of accelerating. So I think we kind of find ourselves in this really interesting dynamic and dichotomy, and we're trying to figure out where it goes and where it leads, and I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen.
So do you think people are going to get back to, is this just a transitory period, and are people going to get back to the office 5 days a week? Do you feel like it's going to happen where they'll be there for a couple days, or do you think it's going to be forever changed and we will probably not go back to the office unless there's an occasion to go back?
Well, there was an edict within Dow Jones for us to go back to the office at least 3 days a week, but we've had that edict 3 different times over the last 9 months, and no one's gone back. People do volunteer to go back just for human contact, but I think 2 days a week maybe, or 3. Even Zoom is doing it. If you live close enough to one of their facilities, you're asked to go in at least a couple times a week. I think you need to have some sort of hybrid. I don't know. I think you would do.
Yeah, I think we're not ever going back to 5 days. I think that those days are over. But I think that even people who work remotely most of the time recognize that there is good in seeing other people and getting together with colleagues, having real interactions in person. What they don't like is being told you have to do it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And I think that is where we will come to. I think that the smart companies that are heeding the research out there that is saying that you are going to get more talent, you're going to simply have more options to hire people if you allow some form of hybrid and remote work, they are going to wise up to that. And so then I think it will become more of a team-based thing. Okay, our team says we don't need to see each other even every week, but we do want to get together once or twice a month. How do we make that happen? And I think that is where many organizations will end up.
And Richard, do you think from a demographic perspective, it's different for people that are later in career versus early in career on what's better? Because I fundamentally believe that people who are just getting out of college and getting into the workforce, I think if all they do is work 5 days at home, I actually don't think it's a good thing, because they miss the vibe and the culture and the mentorship, because video is still a very transactional medium, and it's not because of any fault of the tech. It's because the way that humans are societally programmed, we think of a 30-minute meeting, we're like, all right, there's a beginning and an end, and if at minute 22 there's like a 10-second lull, someone invariably will say, well, is there anything else? I can give you back 10 minutes.
Right.
Right? But when you go to dinner, and you and I recently did an interview, and we went 30 or 45 minutes over, but that's because both of us allowed each other to wander. That doesn't always happen. And if you go to dinner, you automatically get that wander time, because if appetizers are served and there's 10 seconds of silence, you don't get up and say, all right, I'll give you back 20 minutes, I'm leaving. You actually wait and ask what the person might have done over the weekend, or they have a family. And each one of those things gives you more context about the person, that then allows you to build better trust, that then allows you to have better conflict, which is a necessary condition of business. So I do think that there's something that gets taken away from the early in career people if they don't have that level of mentorship. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's 2 levels of this, right?
Okay.
One is the generational difference in how the office is perceived.
Yep.
So if you're in your 50s and 60s, most likely you were trained in the company culture or in the culture of work in general in an office. So you think of the office as a happy place where new things are learned and ideas are exchanged and people are formed. If you're younger, you see the office as a place of surveillance and as a place in which you have forced interactions with people that you don't want to have interactions with, right? And this is...
Do they not see it as a social interaction place where they come in to meet people?
Well, first of all, I think different generations have different sociability, right? We know, one of the things we know about Gen Z is it likes to work alone more than younger generations and older generations.
Interesting.
So there is a personality type that chooses a certain amount of social contact that might be very different from people with the same education level, but a different generational perspective, right? So that's one aspect of it. I think where we need to get to in hybrid work, perhaps, is we have more voluntary interactions with other members of the team, but you can avoid people. And this is the business reason why it might matter. People do not quit companies. They quit bosses.
Yes.
And they quit coworkers. If through remote or hybrid arrangement, you're able to have fewer involuntary interactions with people you don't react with well, your productivity will probably go up. And I haven't seen any research on this. I'd be very curious if anyone else has. But have HR complaints gone down as a result of remote work or hybrid work? most likely, I would expect that they would have.
You expect they have gone down?
Yes.
Why is that?
Fewer involuntary reactions that one or both parties view as negative.
Interesting. And
it was kind of like, so sorry to interrupt.
No, you don't interrupt.
So you have these younger workers, and I always thought it was always beneficial if you're younger to learn from people who've been around, who've had experiences, and collaborate with them or get ideas from them. That's their best education at work or face-to-face interaction. But because of the way technology has evolved, it's minimized face-to-face contact, whether through social media or video, whatever, what have you. So the means of communications have totally changed, and you really do need to have some sort of pairing of the two. They have to coexist in some manner. You just can't be at home all the time. I mean, sometimes I feel as if I'm totally disconnected from the people I work with. And Zoom is good, but if you want to, as you guys know, you all know, the best interviews are face-to-face interviews. Usually in a setting where you have time to get to know that person, to gain their trust. And a Zoom call is just,
we don't like Zoom though.
WebEx call.
WebEx calls.
I think about that a lot of just when my first job in journalism, I was a news clerk at the New York Times, and it was just, you learned through osmosis, just watching and hearing great journalists apply their craft. And it certainly wasn't like that in Business Insider when I was there recently. I worked there for a few years. The young people were working at home, like me. I was working at home. So I think that I did notice many of my Gen Z colleagues being more intentional and saying, can I have a WebEx call with just you? And we would just talk about journalism. And they would ask me, well, what about when someone's being evasive? Or I have this idea that's not quite an idea, but I know it'll be a good story if I could just get it. And so we talk about framing. And so I do think you're right, just not having the atmospherics of this is what we are as a company, this is how work gets done here, this is how we interact with each other. That's gonna be really tough on group WebEx calls. But I think one-on-one, it can happen. I am more optimistic about forming those kinds of relationships, forming that kind of mentorship. That can happen one-on-one, I believe.
But those things have to be voluntarily chosen.
For sure,
right?
Yes.
And you will accept criticism and begin personal change only if you trust the person who is criticizing you and trying to improve.
That's exactly
So
right.
that's the issue, right?
and
So if you're somebody who's younger and you're getting feedback from somebody you've never met, you almost kind of feel as if, what's their motivation without knowing them? I mean, it's also true things like in tech, the reason like Google and Facebook, the way they kept you at the office was by giving you more perks, right? So free
Yoga
food,
classes and
free, healthcare, whatever, gym, what have you, because they wanted to keep you there as long as possible, right? They didn't want you to leave the building. So I guess there's like this idea now, especially among young. I have a son who's 23, and the idea is like, what are they going to do for me when I go there? Like,
See, I think that the role of the office is fundamentally changing. People go into the office to have a social experience, collaborating with people. People work at home when they need to make sure that their head's down, trying to get something done. And that was very different. Like, you don't go into the office to sit in your cubicle to go power through stuff. You can do it at home way better now, because you've got a better setup and all of that. Most people have actually perfected their setup at home, and they can do a much better job in there. I will say this, though, that the next generation of leader, and there's many over here who are kind of early in career, I would think, based on you don't look as old as I do. The next generation of leader, it's going to be really important to make sure that they are really good at building deep relationships without ever having met someone in person. And that's going to be so important, because if the prerequisite requirement is you have to meet someone in order to go out and be a good leader, I think you're going to limit yourself in the kind of talent you're going to be able to find. You're going to limit yourself in the kind of places where you're going to be able to find the talent. And so I think that's a pretty important dimension. But if we think about AI, where does AI fit into all of this from your perspective? Rebecca?
Can I just go back to what you were saying
Yeah.
about the different skills that are required for next generation leadership?
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's not just leaders, that's also being colleagues. Because if you think about what leaders need to be thinking about, what are people's experiences of work when they're at work? And I mean work as a sort of state of mind nowadays, because we're not going to an office except for you every day. But thinking about how are people experiencing this? What kind of community are we creating? How are we treating each other? Are we cutthroat? Are we competitive? Are we compassionate? Are we empathetic? Do I know your pets' names and your kids' names? Have I taken that time to talk to you over appetizers versus saying, okay, you're welcome for giving you that time back. So I think that those are the kinds of leadership skills that are required, but also to be a good colleague too. You asked me about AI. I'm gonna have John go with AI.
Oh.
He said, what is the role of AI at work?
Oh, well, so if you ask anybody who really knows AI, and we talked about this earlier, it's really hard to predict where it's going to go, especially in 5 years. Like people will honestly tell you they don't know, or they won't tell you because they don't want to terrify you, with the possibilities. Like as reporters, we're somewhat reluctant to accept new technology. I mean, most of the places I worked, it was the fear of the unknown, and then they embraced it, and they realized what a great tool the internet could be. AI could actually be a fantastic tool in terms of research and in terms of finding things that you may not be able to find on your own. I think that we need to embrace that. We'll reluctantly do it. I mean, news organizations, I know that Reuters has a definite policy. Bloomberg's developing one. I know AP and Dow Jones are using AI-generated stories that make it easier, so we don't have
John, what surprised you the most about AI that you didn't expect?
How, some of the stuff that I've seen that was generated by AI was really difficult to distinguish from being. And there's actually a guy, I probably shouldn't talk about this, but what the hell, why not? So somebody at VentureBeat, the editor-in-chief, wants to embrace AI to the point where it will replace people eventually. We had a panel a few months ago at Microsoft in Mountain View. There were 10 reporters, and he was the one person who wanted to go all in on AI and basically said, you know what, we could win awards with this, we could create the great American novel, and the rest of us were somewhat aghast, but part of what he said is true, and I think if we just use it like any tool, use any tool correctly, it'll enhance what you do. But I just read a story. It was this obscure college basketball game summary. It was in the sports section. It was months ago. I was like, who would cover this? Like, how could AP? It was an AP story. How could AP send somebody there? And at the end, in small type, the story was generated by
entirely generated.
Yeah.
And Richard, what are you finding most surprising?
I do not think we're going to end up in a world in which AI writes most news stories. I agree. I think we're going to end up in a world very soon, if we're not halfway there now, in which AI puts together the research and the structure of a news story. And it might well be that the way people consume news matters a lot, and different formats the same story can be generated in different formats using AI. So it's a more consumable, engaging, rich, and rewarding experience. One of the things we look at a lot at my company is story completion rates. People start reading, do they make it to the bottom? Where do they stop? Why do they stop?
That's a really good point about
when did I lose your attention?
Making it more consumable, because here's the reality. It's like a lot of people in journalism have a certain way of writing stories. I mean, the way I'm guilty of it. And it's not consumed the same way it was consumed 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
So what is the story completion rate that you folks are finding on average?
About 35%, unless you're talking about financial stuff, in which it's about 60, 70%.
Wow.
And
that seems astonishingly good.
That's hard.
Well, our stories are shorter, and it's also the publications they appear in. But we're constantly trying to push that number higher, right? And people consume stories for different reasons, right? So news, I hate to say it, serves two purposes. One is to give information for people to make decisions, and the other is to entertain them when they're online at Starbucks or waiting for a train or a bus or something like that. And those stories are consumed on different devices at different times of day by different types of people who have different needs in that moment. And if you can format the same information into those structures, you can meet the needs of those people in real time. Let me just say one other thing about AI. I think opposition to AI is driven by in which of two elites you see yourself or want to aspire, that are aspiring to, right? If you live in the accountable world, right, which is the world which is driven by commissions or bonuses, or your output, your results determine a great deal of your pay, you like AI because it's going to allow you to generate more results that make money for you. If you live in the unaccountable world, and that's a gross overgeneralization, but we're talking about people who work at very large, old school corporations, government agencies, nonprofits, where your pay is not linked to your performance, AI is frightening because a great deal of what you're doing is exposed and could be replaced. So about 19% of tasks, largely clerical tasks, including the first draft of, say, legal briefs or accounting reports, can be done by AI now. Now, on one hand, you're taking the drudgery away, but if you live a very comfortable life in which your pay is not determined on whether or not the economy grows at 1% or 3%, you see the world very differently from somebody who sees the world as growing and their potential compensation growing with it.
What surprised you the most about AI in the past year?
I'll
No,
dodge for now.
I think that it has surprised me how useful it is for me. It's definitely made me a better writer. It also takes away a little bit of the loneliness of working from home. I almost feel like I've got a writing partner. I can say, I want this sentence to sort of say this, or I need a better verb for this. It gives it to me. So I guess I'm surprised at actually how I use it every day, and I can't imagine my life without it. And that's in my job.
I'm going to eventually, I agree with what you just said. I eventually embrace it. I always think in a larger picture, we're under so much pressure. We're trying to do more with fewer people.
Yes.
Like, for instance, as soon as this is over, I have to write a story, like within 20 minutes, because there aren't enough people doing the job anymore. There's more information than ever before, so you find yourself writing more than you ever have before. So you have to adapt to that. So you would be a fool not to look around and see, how can I become more productive without losing my mind, right? And then, and I think AI can do that. And I am actually encouraged. And I've written a lot about lawmakers and AI and regulation, but I actually am somewhat encouraged by these forums that they are doing through the Senate members and through the White House, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to find a balance between innovation and then however we want to define privacy. They seem to know a lot more. They seem to be more well-intentioned and well-read versus social media, which they totally missed. And now they feel guilty about it. So instead of legislating, which they can't with social media, they're suing companies like Meta or Amazon. They're trying to do it in another manner. So anyway, long-winded answer, but
John, do you really trust the House and the Senate, for example,
no, I don't,
to make decisions
I
about
don't.
AI when they were able to watch Howdy Doody when it was broadcast live, right? Are 80-year-olds the best people to decide our future?
But
that's true.
I do think that we should expect better public-private partnership as we move forward. You will start to see a far tighter relationship between the public sector and private sector, because I don't think the private sector can be completely unregulated in this particular case. And we will own some responsibility in the private sector in educating the public sector on how quickly things are moving. And I think it's going to be I've spent a lot of time in DC recently, and I'm very impressed by government officials and how deeply they're thinking about this. Frankly, far more than I was expecting them to be. And there's a nuance that they're factoring in, which was actually a surprise to me.
Yeah, so what you just said echoes what there's a guy I talked to yesterday. He was in this AI forum, and what they did this time was they had about 20 people, VCs, academics, smaller tech companies, which I think is really important. Before, you've usually seen the big five, the big tech companies who want to create their own rules to the detriment of everyone else. This time it was more inclusive. And I think the whole idea is just kind of trying to create some sort of communication or framework, some sort of guardrails. And it's like, what you said is exactly what he said.
Don't we have to be careful, though? The people who are angry about content moderation on social media are going to be writing the rules about AI. And they're importing a lot of their complaints about content moderation into a category where it doesn't really apply. On the other hand, there are people inside the federal government who are very sophisticated about this, especially in the intelligence community. And when they look at what they're able to gather through their billion-dollar apparatus and what AI can deliver at a fraction of the cost, I'm talking about synthesizing information, translating information in near real time, combining lots of unrelated sources of information and finding patterns. All of these things are things that they see the private sector doing better. And my guess is that on one level, they want to be a customer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know we're coming to the end of time. Is there one quick insight that you'd have people who are practitioners in organizations on what advice would you have for them, given the purview that you have of speaking to a lot of companies? John, we start with you.
It's inevitable. I mean, AI, companies who have absolutely no AI plans are talking about them publicly as they're scrambling behind the scenes trying to figure out what they're going to do. I mean, it's going to be something that we're going to have to deal with in some sort of form. So it does tech and not tech companies.
How about you, Rebecca?
Yeah, I would say that that the fear of AI is real, and so you don't discount that, and also that technology will help solve a lot of the problems of what does the future of work look like, but it won't solve all of them. A lot of it does come down to what we were talking about, the leadership stuff, the actual human behaviors, practices of being together and working together to get the job done.
For leaders and managers, do not take the surveillance of the office and apply it to the remote or hybrid work environment. Be very careful to maintain trust as you introduce surveillance techniques for your at-home or away workers, or you will lose them. But there is a way to use AI to monitor productivity, to boost performance, without threatening or alienating the very people who you need to be productive, creative, and prosperous.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank
Folks,
you.
let's give them a big round of applause.